Hello, Epic family. We are going to talk about how to execute contracts when an entity is involved. The thing to remember with this is an entity cannot sign a contract because it's not a natural person and it lacks the physical ability or the legal capacity to do so. So, anytime we are dealing with an LLC, a corporation, a power of attorney, um, a trust, an estate, we need to have the entity as whatever they are in the contract. If it's the buyer or the seller, we need to identify the entity, but the signature on the contract needs to be somebody who has the authority to sign on behalf of the entity. If we don't get that information, the contract could be considered invalid or unenforceable, and we definitely do not want to get into that situation. So, to start with, and what's most common is LLCs and corporations. So, when you're working with this type of entity, you're going to need a copy of the operating agreement or a statement of authority. And anybody who has an LLC or a corporation should be able to provide that for you. And some of the examples that we're going to see when it comes to buying and selling property is there'll be like Smith Investments LLC or Pine Street Inc. or maybe Legacy Real Estate Group. So, what that looks like on the contract is where it has the buyer's printed name or the seller's printed name, that's going to be the name of the entity. So, in this instance, we have Smith Investments LLC, and underneath is Kathy Fowler, owner, because the operating agreement that I have with Smith Investments LLC identifies me as somebody who has the authority to sign on behalf of the LLC, and my title is owner. With Pine Street Inc., there's going to be either an operating agreement or a statement of authority that says that Chris Martin is a manager for the corporation and he has authority to sign on behalf of Pine Street Inc. So, other possibilities is it could be that the operating agreement says that I'm a member of the LLC. So, in that case, it would be Smith Investments LLC, Kathy Fowler, member. Or it could say the statement of authority could give Chris Martin, principal, the authority to sign on behalf of Pine Street Inc. So, whatever title is given in the operating agreement, that's how the person who's actually doing the signing of the contract needs to be identified. And then the buyer or the seller, whichever the entity is in this instance, that's where we type out the entity name. So if we're dealing with a power of attorney, this is, for example, Jane owns a house but is living overseas for work and she wants to sell the property, but she can't attend in the closing in person. So she assigns her brother, Mark, the power of attorney so he can act on her behalf. With the power of attorney, and always, always, always have these reviewed by the title company, because a power of attorney to sell real estate has to be a very specific and durable power of attorney. So a property attorney or somebody that works with the title company will be able to step you through that, but never take a power of attorney on face value. Always have somebody look it over who works in title and understands what they need to say. So in this instance, if Jane L. Smith wanted to purchase property and she gave her brother Mark as power of attorney the ability to sign on her behalf, there would be a power of attorney that would need to be uploaded into the SkySlope file. And it also needs to be sent to title to make sure that it's sufficient to purchase property, and then we're good to go. But in that case, since they're purchasing it as Jane L. Smith, that's how the buyer's name would be printed in the contract. But then the signatory in this case is going to be Mark Johnson as Jane's power of attorney. So Mark Johnson, POA. Another one that we see quite a bit of is trusts. And a trust is used in real estate to hold property in the name of the trust rather than of an individual. It's just used to simplify estate management and probate delays. So, for example, if Sarah were to place her home in a revocable living trust for estate planning purposes, naming herself as trustee and her son as the successor trustee, and then years later passes away. As the new trustee, her son now manages the trust assets, which would include the home. So in this case, what we're going to see is the Sarah Connor Revocable Living Trust, because that was what she had set up years ago. And then in this case, it probably should have been under the seller instead of the buyer, but just pretend this is the seller. John Connor, as trustee, can sign on behalf of Sarah Connor Revocable Living Trust. So the Sarah Connor Revocable Living Trust is the entity that is either buying or selling the property, and the signator is John Connor as the trustee for the Revocable Living Trust. Another thing to look at, we're going to talk about estates because they're a little bit different, but on an estate, it's going to be noted as the estate of Sharon Smith, and then the signatory on that is going to be either an executor or an administrator, depending on how the estate is set up. So the estate only exists after an individual has passed away, and the court formally appoints an executor if there's a will, or an administrator if there's not a will, to manage the estate. So only the court-appointed executor or administrator has the authority to sign real estate contracts on behalf of the estate, and without the court appointment, no one has authority to convey or sell the property. So in this case, we want to make sure that we get a copy of the letter of testamentary and make sure that that's added in our SkySlope file, so that we've got documentation that shows that we verified Nicole Johnson as executor or administrator is acting on behalf of the estate of Sharon Smith. So hopefully that helps clear this up. I know this is a confusing topic. If you've got any questions, reach out to our fearless broker, Katie Kingsley, or you can reach out to me anytime.